Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those joining us on the East Coast. Thank you all for joining us today to learn about the Climate Action Reserve's Nitrogen Management Project Protocol version 2.0. We begin just some quick housekeeping items that your audio, as you probably figured out now, is available via telephone and computer. All the attendees will be muted, but we ask you please ask questions via the chat function. We'll answer as many as possible during the presentation. I have some colleagues doing that, but we will open it up at the end of the presentation for questions as well. A recording will be made available on the Climate Action Reserve's webpage after this presentation. And please feel free to contact us as well with any further questions that might not be covered in today's session. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Quickly, we're just going to go over an introduction to the reserve and staff here, some background on nitrogen management and the protocol, and then go over the protocol's definitions, eligibility criteria, quantifying the emissions, and then the monitoring, reporting, and verification associated with the protocol. And then, yeah, like I said, have time for questions. So quickly, for those of you who don't know, the Climate Action Reserve is a private nonprofit committed to market-based solutions to combat climate change. We develop carbon offset policies and protocols. The nitrogen management one we're discussing today. We manage a registry online of voluntary offset projects and store the credits there. We also oversee an independent verification program and provide project oversight. And we are an accredited offset project registry for the California Air Resources Board as part of California's compliance offset market. Thus far, we have 18 different project protocols for the US and Mexico, and the map to the right shows you the location of where and the project types of where those projects are located. And so far, we have issued over 120 million offset credits, both on the voluntary market and the California compliance market. So for those who don't know me, my name is Trevor Anderson. I'm a policy manager at the Climate Action Reserve, serving with the policy team here and work primarily on protocol development, protocol updates, and was the lead in developing this, the nitrogen management update to version 2.0. I'm joined today by my colleagues Sammy Osman and Heather Raven. Sammy and Heather are both huge helps in updating the protocol, and they will be here helping with coordinating the webinar and answering any questions that come in. All right, so for some quick background, just so we're all on the same page. So what exactly is the Nitrogen Management Project Protocol, or the NMPP? It's a voluntary carbon offset protocol that rewards growers with carbon credits for reducing nitrous oxide emissions associated with the adoption of nitrogen management practices, and those practices to be beyond that what's projected to happen and under business as usual situations. And so if there was not a carbon market, we get at the additionality concept there in slides later on in the presentation. So nitrogen management, as you don't know, is the addition and management of nitrogen to agricultural soils to increase the supply of nitrogen to crops. And this is primarily done through the application of fertilizers. And so our protocol, NMPP, contains the rules and procedures for users to earn these carbon credits, which are Climate Action Reserve, they are termed Climate Reserve Tons, or CRTs, for the greenhouse gas emission reductions associated with the implementation of said nitrogen management practices. All right, and so why do we need this protocol? So studies continue to show that farmers are applying nitrogen in excess amounts of what is required by the crops. And so this extra soil nitrogen, or just nitrogen in the soil in general, can be converted to nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas with a global warming potential roughly 300 times that of carbon dioxide. And as the stats here show, the latest from the latest EPA inventory shows that in 2016, N2O emissions in the U.S. from agriculture alone were over 283 million metric tons, which is equivalent to the emissions from 70 coal-fired power plants, This is representative of more than 4% of total U.S. GHG emissions and more than over 75% of total U.S. N2O emissions or nitrous oxide emissions alone. It's concerning too is that this is over 13% higher than 1990 levels. So these are growing, and with the expected future increase in activities, agricultural activities that drive N2O emissions to meet crop demand for an ever-growing population, it's possible these emissions will only increase as time goes on. And also we know that about roughly 20% of these emissions can be directly attributed to the application of synthetic fertilizers. And just quickly to give you a timeline, so you can see that we have spent the reserve has spent a lot of time here on developing this protocol, and we've made in recent years have now made this significant update from the original one adopted back in 2012 to bring us to where we are today, and why we are here today to provide an overview of this protocol, raise awareness, gauge interest, and get going on project implementation. All right, so let's get going with the protocol definitions. Okay, so a nitrogen management project is the adoption and maintenance of one or more eligible project activities during the cultivation year of an eligible crop on one or more fields in an eligible project area that reduce N2O emissions. And so that was a mouthful, but we will be going through these the further definitions on the coming slides. What's good with projects is that multiple fields may be managed together under a single project, and so these fields could be employing a variety of different practices and crops, and could be across different regions and have different owners and field managers. Allows for a lot of flexibility there on the number of. There are no size limits. So, a lot of flexibility for the number of fields and possibilities that could be. That could compromise one nitrogen management project. And we also allow for multiple projects to be managed together as what we term a project cooperative, which could be as a way to streamline efficiency, where, as we discuss later on. All right, so let's get it. So what some of these terms mean. The eligible project activities, that is the activities that when implemented can earn you carbon credits. There are two in this protocol. So we have the one of which is mandatory for all projects, and that is a reduction in the synthetic nitrogen rate. And that is a reduction in your N rate compared to your baseline levels, historical levels, without going below nitrogen demand at the risk of compromising crop yield. We also have the optional practice here of using an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, specifically the option of applying a nitrification inhibitor or switching to a soil release fertilizer, in addition to making that synthetic N rate reduction, can earn you carbon credits. Note though that with complete greenhouse gas accounting, we do have methods to account for organic nitrogen applications, irrigation, and tillage practices. So all those other activities are permissible. We just cannot attribute carbon credits for their implementation. This table here can show you which crops and regions are eligible in the protocol. So as you can see, it's primarily the major field crops. We have barley, corn, cotton, oats, sorghum, spring wheat, and winter wheat. And we also have tomatoes. For brevity purposes, they're listed by the eligible regions are listed by state here, but note that the eligibility rules, as we'll discuss, are pertain to the county level. And so with this protocol, we create an eligibility lookup tool, which will also be showing which which can show you where which crops are eligible in which specific counties. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. So where was I? Okay. We pick up, I apologize for the interruption. All right. And then defining the cultivation year, which is really pertinent to the eligibility rules of start date and reporting periods. The cultivation year in this protocol is defined as the period between the first day after harvest of the last primary crop on a field and the last day of harvest for the current primary crop on a field. The example below shows how this could look. As you see, primary crop, is the main production crop grown on a field in a given year. And so if you have as you can see in the bottom, the last day of corn harvest, the day after that would start the first day of the next primary crop's cultivation year, which in this example would be wheat. And you can see too that, so each crop has its, whether it's in a rotation or not, it has its own distinct cultivation year, and that cover crops, which are planted before the primary crop, what's important, any nitrogen that might be added during there would be included in the subsequently planted primary crop. And then because all the eligible crops in this protocol, as we just saw, are all annuals, we estimate this is roughly will be a 12-month period with some wiggle room here or there. This slide points at what a project structure, how the project structures may look like. There's a variety of different options. We want to make sure we go over the important roles and then the account types that they would have to set up with the reserve. And so there will be a field manager who is the entity that's actually managing the project activities. The project owner would be the specific entity that actually would own the greenhouse gas emission reductions, the carbon credits. And the project developer would be the entity managing the actual project. So that means that they are managing all the monitoring, reporting, and verification required with the protocol. And similarly, the cooperative developer would be that entity at the cooperative or aggregate level. And so it's very possible that the project developer, project owner, and even field manager could all be the same person, but there's a lot of flexibility here, as you can see. And the graph here shows too how this may play out further. Some other players might be involved, of course, would be a landowner if that entity is different from a field manager, project owner, and there could be some other sub-project developers involved in a cooperative. All right, moving on into eligibility. The eligible location, so eligible project areas, as mentioned, this is assessed at the county level. So the map here shows where all the counties shaded in green shows where projects can be implemented. This is again, it's based to the intercontinental US, and the darker shade of green, the more crops that are eligible in that county. The most out of the 10 eligible crops, the most that any single county has is 6. And so just giving some kind of examples of the differences you can see here in McLean County, North Dakota, there's a possible maximum of 6 crops that are eligible for a project there. Whereas in Yolo County, California, there are only 2 crops currently eligible. And this is largely limited by the data that was available to us as we updated the protocol. And but that is something we'll be looking to update as we go further, so we can add that many more regions to the protocol. The start date. So this is important for getting your project listed with the reserve on our registry. So the start date is defined as the first day of a new cultivation year during which eligible activities are implemented on a field. Where this can get confusing is that we anticipate having projects with multiple fields. And so a project start date would need to be nominated for projects with multiple fields. And to set that, a project developer would need to nominate one field whose start date would be used as the project start date. And this field would need to be submitted to us before the end of that field's cultivation year. So as we would expect, we need to be submitted within 12 months of that start date. Other fields that might join this project right from the start would need to nominate a start date as well for those particular fields. That would seemingly be after the project start date, and they can be submitted within 24 months of their respective start dates. What's important to note here is that no credits or CRTs can be earned for activities prior to the project start date. And we'll hope that the next slide, where we show some examples, will exemplify this concept further. So you can see here, and again, there's a variety of possible options here, but just to provide a more conventional scenario where you have your project start date with your field 1 start date, so the earliest field in the project, followed by the field 2, 3, and 4th field start dates. And so you can see then that assuming then that each field ends in consequential order, the project submittal deadline would be at the end of you would have up until the end of the harvest of field 1. So you have that window there from the project start date from the field 1 start date to the end of field 1 harvest to get your project submitted to us. In the second example here, you can see a situation where the first field that was used to set the project start date, the harvest or the cultivation year, actually doesn't end or ends after the second and third field ends. And so you can just still see that in this case, that window of opportunity to submit a project to us for listing could in fact happen after the second and third field had ended their harvest, assuming that their start date was after the project start date. Moving on to the reporting period, which is the period of time over which the greenhouse gas emission reductions from the activities are quantified. This is equal to 1 complete cultivation year of an eligible crop, with the exception of initial reporting periods, which we allow flexibility in that they may consist of up to 2 cultivation years. And projects with multiple fields may in fact experience overlapping reporting periods, similar with the start dates. In a moment, go through some examples of what that might look like. But what's important to note here too, though, is instances or years that would not count towards a reporting period, which would include any time a field is left fallow, the field is cultivating an ineligible crop, for example, soybeans, possibly in a rotation with corn or wheat or another eligible crop, and if fields are cultivating an eligible crop but either do not meet the protocol requirements or are chosen to be withdrawn for the year, those situations would not count as a reporting period, though I must note continuous monitoring and reporting is required throughout. So as we can see, just some quick examples here, instead of what it might look like with that conventional scenario, and as if there's overlapping reporting periods. So the reporting period wouldn't end until all fields within the project have completed their harvest, but the reporting period also begins on day 1 of the cultivation year for that earliest field. So you can see here in this first example that the second reporting period has actually begun before the first one has even ended. And then to give an example of what it might look like if project developers choose for the initial reporting period to have 2 cultivation years, you can see that even though the first cultivation year ends, the reporting period has not, and so it just goes further for the until the end of harvest of that second cultivation year. Moving on to the crediting period, which is the period of time over which projects can earn credits. This is simply defined as 10 reporting periods. And so what's important to note here, though, is that each field, that projects and fields within the projects are each limited to a maximum of 10 reporting periods per crediting period. And so what So it's very likely that, or it's very likely, but it's possible that all fields within a project might not reach their 10 reporting period limit, because it could be possible there would be years in which fields, whether they're planting an eligible crop or maybe are going for fallow, that they would not be considered as a reporting period. But if the overall project at large is moving forward and has at least one field in there still with that counts towards a reporting period, the project itself might hit that 10 reporting period maximum limit first. And as I stressed before, continuous monitoring and reporting is mandated throughout the entire crediting period, regardless of if fields are planted ineligible crops, not seeking CRTs, what have you. And then we also, for a crediting period to be renewed one time, so for a maximum of 2 crediting periods per project. All right, getting into the concept of additionality. So this is that project fields must satisfy these following 3 tests here to be considered additional, and so that is that these activities and the resulting emission reductions would not have occurred without the incentives from the carbon market. So we have a performance standard test, which we'll get on discuss more on the next slide, but this is a project passes this test by meeting a performance threshold, which is a standard of performance that's applicable to all projects. The reserve always takes a standardized approach to our protocols. And we also have the legal requirement test, which which simply is passed when there are no laws, statutes, or similar regulations that would require the adoption or continued use of the eligible project activities. Then we also have a credit or payment stacking test, which is passed so long as the growers or fields aren't receiving ecosystem credit that also include the greenhouse gas benefits or not receiving payments, direct payments for the adoption or continued use of the eligible activities. So we're going to discuss the performance threshold in more detail here now. Again, we have two eligible activities. So most importantly for the required activity, and so for all projects, that is, you have to surpass the performance threshold for synthetic nitrogen rate reductions, and that is growers must demonstrate each project field's nitrogen use efficiency exceeds the 3-year county average or benchmark. So this is assessed at the field level and must be calculated and assessed each reporting period. The metric, the nitrogen use efficiency metric that the Climate Action Reserve is using in version 2.0 is termed the partial factor productivity, or PFP. This is one of the simplest, if not the simplest, metrics for nitrogen use efficiency, and is simply calculated as your crop yield divided by your total N rate. So at the end of the reporting period, at the end of the cultivation year, projects will need to quantify their yield divided by the amount of nitrogen that they applied over the entire cultivation year, divide the two together to calculate the field's PFP, and compare it to the benchmarks that are found in the eligibility lookup tool, and make sure that the project PFP is greater than the benchmark PFP. And so also we have a sort of the additional optional practice of applying enhanced efficiency fertilizers. From the reserve's research, it was found that these projects, these practices, especially when applied in tandem with the N rate reduction, are minimally adopted, and so they would not constitute common practice. So as long that growers who are applying these enhanced efficiency fertilizers in a project have not done so during their baseline period, which we'll get into in a little bit, and pass the above test for synthetic N rate reductions, then they do pass the test for the performance test for enhanced efficiency fertilizers. So to give you some examples what this might look like, again, using those counties again in so looking at McLean County, North Dakota, and say we look at corn, which has an average partial factor productivity of 23.5. A project growing corn in McLean County, North Dakota, would have to show that their PFP is greater than 23.5. So again, that's dividing their project yield divided by their project end rate. And just for another example, again, using the other county, I had the Yolo County in California growing tomatoes. The PFP is 452. And so a project PFP would have to surpass that benchmark. It is important to note that the benchmarks, the PFPs, are unitless. It's the pounds per acre of yield divided by the pounds per acre of the nitrogen applied. So that is why you can see such a variety of differences in the numbers for PFPs. All right. And so at this time, we're going to quickly do a live demonstration of using the eligibility lookup tool, which I have referenced a couple times now. Bear with me one moment. Okay. So as we can see here, projects could enter their field IDs, so their field numbers, to keep track of all their different fields. And the first column here, this is already pre-populated with the selections, but I'll do a live momentarily. But you have your states, your counties, your crop, the fertilizer reduction rate, whether the field is irrigated, if an enhanced efficiency fertilizer was applied, if they converted to tillage in the short term, and then the determination of whether it's eligible or not will automatically pop up in column I. If it is eligible, then your average PFP, that benchmark for the performance standard test, will automatically pop up. So to do a live run here, run through in for field 5. And let's do a cornfield in Iowa. You can see, so once you select your state, the counties populate, and do Madison, Iowa. Said we'll do corn, and let's do a slight end rate reduction, 10%. Whether it's irrigated or not, we'll say was an enhanced efficiency fertilizer applied. Say they switched to a slow release, and we'll say that no, they did not convert to short-term no-till. They are still applying conventional tillage, so they are tilling. And as you can see, the results automatically populate that it is eligible, and then there is the PFP you would have to surpass. What's important to know here too, as you can see in column K, you also get the county average end rate, which is an option to use as your baseline end rate, which we'll touch on in some later slides. Just to give you another example to show you what it might look like if you hit an ineligible combination or scenario. Let's just go to my home state of New Jersey and home county here. And New Jersey is known for its tomatoes, but we'll see if that's eligible for a nitrogen management project. Say that it's not irrigated, and we'll say no to using enhanced efficiency fertilizer and no switch to short-term no-till, and you can see it's ineligible. And so when it is ineligible for a project, none of the yield or the average end rate or partial factor productivity will populate. All right, we'll return now to the presentation. And I guess quickly, let's note that you can, as you can see, do this for a number of fields, and this will be required for projects. This will be required for verification purposes. Projects will need to keep a record of their eligibility lookup tool to send to as part of the monitoring and reporting requirements. Okay. And so one last eligibility rule, and it's a simple one. Regulatory compliance. It's pretty simple. No laws must be broken during the implementation of a project. No project activities can result in a material violation. And if a verifier finds out that activities have caused a material violation, so that is generally they're not administrative anything that isn't administrative in nature, then credits will not be issued for the emission reductions that occurred on that field during the time frame when those violations occurred. So projects are required to stay in good regulatory standing. Moving on from eligibility, we're going to touch on quantification. This provides an overview of how emission reductions are quantified from the comparison of baseline to project activities. So CRTs are equal to the emission reductions, which are equivalent to the primary effect emission reductions from the implementation of eligible nitrogen management activities, less the project emissions, primary effect emissions that might come from increased organic N applications, and then less than any secondary effect emissions as well. So the primary effect emission reductions, primary effect just gets at the intent of the protocol, which is to have a reduction in the direct and indirect N2O emissions. Direct N2O emissions, those that emit directly from the site of where the fertilizer is applied. Indirect emissions stemming from locations further downstream where the nitrogen may have been lost and then N2O then emits elsewhere. These are all quantified using our new nitrogen management quantification tool, which is an Excel-based, easy-to-use tool. And so this, similarly to we'll show some screenshots of what this might look like, but similar to the lookup tool with the NM Quant tool, you make those same series of selections for your project activities for your given field scenario, and the baseline and project emission and resulting project emission reductions are instantly quantified for you there. And so again, that's from you making your selections for your N rate reduction, whether it was enhanced efficiency fertilizer or not, just accounting then for your tillage and irrigation practice, and of course your location. The primary effect emissions from increases in organic N rate applications. And this is only if applicable. So as I had mentioned, we account for organic N rate, the credible activities of reduction synthetic N rate. Organic N is allowed to be applied. However, if a grower increases the amount of organic N that was compared to how much was applied historically, then the emissions, the N2O emissions associated with that increase in organic N is subtracted from the emission reductions quantified by the quant tool. And then, and so again, it's only applicable if that is the case. And then for the secondary effect emissions, which are the unintended or untargeted greenhouse gas emissions from these project types, which would be any carbon dioxide emissions associated with increases in fossil fuel use that could possibly stem from the project activities. For example, if there's any increases in irrigation frequency, or possibly if there's split applications of nitrogen, so growing a greater number of nitrogen applications than have been historically used, there might be some increases in the cultivation equipment there, which could result in an increase in fossil fuel use. However, there's a lot of flexibility here where qualitatively or quantitatively project developers can show that these emissions are actually determined to be de minimis, in which case they would not need to be accounted for here. So it is we anticipate most likely the credits you earn will chiefly be calculated, or the emission reductions will be chiefly calculated using the NM Quant tool. To quickly touch on the baseline period, so we know what we're comparing the project activities to. So the the baseline paints the scenario of the more business as usual situation, what we would expect if you weren't implementing a nitrogen management project. And this protocol uses a baseline look back period of at least 3 years immediately prior to the start date. And so that compromises at least 3 eligible crop cultivation years. Understandably so, if it's grown in a culture, a rotation, then like a 2-crop or 3-crop rotation, then you might have to go back 6 or 9 years or so to depending on if it's a 2-crop or 3-crop rotation. If it's a monoculture, then it should be just the 3 years directly prior to the project start date. And then using those 3 years of data, need to compute an average N rate that was applied over that baseline period. And so in this protocol, we have 3 different options for selecting or calculating that average baseline N rate. The first and foremost, most important, is the using actual historical and application records. This would be the most likely situation of business as usual, what we'd expect going forward, and we site specific. However, we understand that it might be difficult, especially the further you go back, to retrieve records or sufficient records. So the 2 backup options we have here would be then and this is a hierarchy approach. So the second option, if in the event that historical and application records are unavailable or insufficient, historical expert recommendations could be used. So if a grower has sought agronomic guidance in the past, any N rate recommendations that the agronomist or crop advisor has recommended could be used to set your baseline. And if those are unavailable or aren't done, then the projects are allowed to use those county average N rate benchmarks that are retrievable from the eligibility lookup tool, as we showed you shortly before. And so using then that county average N rate as the baseline average N rate from which your project would need to reduce its synthetic N rate from. To quickly touch then on the primary effect emission reductions from the project. So again, these are mostly used, quantified directly using the user-friendly Excel tool, the NM Quant tool. What's important to note here is that first and foremost, for using that tool, you're going to want to calculate the synthetic N rate reduction. The percentage N rate reduction is between your baseline average and your project N rate, and that there's 3 factors that go into calculating your project N rate. The most common and most likely situation will be from simply the total amount of synthetic N that is applied over the entire cultivation year. But then there are 2 additional possible factors where should there be those situations where a project did not earn or seek credits in a given cultivation year, because we require continuous monitoring, any increases in nitrogen applied in those years compared to those fields' respective baselines, that increase in that change would need to be added. And then similarly, if it's determined there was leakage, which leakage greenhouse gas accounting criteria occurs when greenhouse gas emissions are changed or moved from outside of the project. So in this case, due to production shifting, for the possibility that N rate reduced in the project in those fields might be increased elsewhere to possibly increase crop yield or what have you somewhere else. If this is assessed in the protocol equations there, but if it is determined there's leakage which would be determined from a statistically decrease in yield, then a proportionate increase to your N rate would need to be added. But again, those are, in italics is there for if applicable, if leakage. It's highly anticipated. The most common situation would be simply the total N rate applied over the entire cultivation year. And then after you have that percentage N rate calculated, you want to make sure you have confirmed the eligibility, and in the eligibility lookup tool, having that there as a reminder. And as I mentioned before, with using the quant tool, you're just going to enter minimal inputs and make a series of selections from convenient drop-down menus. And then the tool itself sums all the emission reductions right there in-house for up to 20 fields in the project. If you have more than 20 fields, you might need to just use additional copies of the tool and then sum all the emission reductions for all the fields in the project external to the tool. And just for the interest of time, to give you because it's similar to the eligibility lookup tool, these screenshots here show you what it might look like, where you enter your field number select your state and counties and your crops. Difference here is you're going to enter your acreage, and then you make your other project selections, the N rate reduction, whether it's irrigated or not, if an enhanced efficiency fertilizer was applied, and or if there's any been conversion to no-till. And then you can see the bottom images here show you the emission reductions realized per field, and then the sum as well for the entire project on the right. So again, this would be a really small project, just showing with 2 different fields, but it's a very similar functionality here to the eligibility lookup tool. And I should note too that both tools are free and made available upon request to the reserve. So if you are interested in playing around with them yourself, you can send an email request to the reserve, and we will send you a copy. We're moving on to monitoring, reporting, and verification. Essential parts of the project. So a monitoring plan and monitoring report are required and must be established for all monitoring and reporting activities associated with the project. The monitoring plans really would get at how data for all the relevant parameters are collected and recorded, while the reports make sure they include all the necessary data to determine eligibility and actually calculate the emission reductions, as well as including the results of those calculations. And both documents, the monitoring plan and monitoring report, must be submitted annually after each report within 12 months of each reporting period. And what's important with these two is that the monitoring plan and report serve the basis for verifiers to confirm the protocol requirements have been met. It's essential for project emission reductions to be verified for each reporting period before any credits can be issued. And we, as part of those verification requirements, site visits and desktop reviews are both required. For site visits, a minimum of 5% of the total number of fields in a project are required. And these site visit requirements would be informed by risk-based random sampling approaches. An additional number of fields will be subject to a desktop review, also based on some random sampling approaches. And just a note of caution too, that with the flexibility the protocol has with where fields can be located in a project, that there could be a project in California and in Ohio, for example. This points out while there might be some strategy involved with selecting the cooperative approach for just to possibly better manage aspects such as this and streamline the processes there. And so with that, we have really more than 15 minutes to take some questions, and I see that the box has been closed. So one moment. All right, everybody, we'll be one moment. We're going through the questions here. Okay. Bear with me one moment. I believe my colleague Sammy has gone back to most of you folks who have been submitting questions, and thank you to all those who have. Let's see. Believe actually all questions thus far have been answered. If there are any new ones, let's see. Okay, got a question. Can you speak to emerging technologies that reduce external fertilizer needs? Sure, it's a great question. And another thing to note too with the protocol is, unfortunately, with the data we had available, we weren't able to credit other activities or other practices, but there are a host of other nitrogen management activities that are encouraged and are recommended, and for our case, especially if they result in a reduction in N rate or a more optimal amount of N rate application. So, those could be the full suite of the 4R. So in addition to the right rate, the right time, right place, and right source of fertilizer. There are also emerging technologies with some soil inoculants that through their application would a byproduct would be a less of a reduction in N rate, because less nitrogen is then needs to be applied with the inoculant, allowing the crop to more efficiently take up nitrogen. We also, there'll be a suite of more precision ag technologies come out to really help improve the efficiency of nitrogen use and enhance crop and uptake, which we know are two major factors that reduce N2O emissions. And also it will be exciting too, as more of those practices and technologies come away, then we hope to have further data available for us to incorporate them as credible activities in the protocol itself. Question about if the webinar was recorded, and yes, it is being recorded now as we speak still, and yes, we'll have a recording available on our webpage shortly hereafter. We will also have a PDF of the slides available to all who have registered as well. Let's see. Okay. Whoop. Okay, so one question getting at crop rotations. So if a grower has a corn-soy rotation, the year corn is grown would count as a cultivation year, but the soy year would not be counted. Correct. That is correct. And so soy, so we imagine this is going to be a common situation, a corn-soy rotation. And this is a great example to use. And so soybeans as a legume and a natural nitrogen fixer, they're really minimal nitrogen is already applied to soybeans, and so there really isn't much of a nitrogen reduction that could be made on soy fields. So there's the reason why they are not an eligible crop. That being said, again, as we see this to be a common situation, it's kind of where we came from in making those procedures for the continuous reporting and monitoring during those ineligible crop years, and having so making sure that, if though there happens to be any increases in nitrogen rate applied to a soybean year from traditional soybean years, that increase would need to be accounted for. But that soy year itself, as it's not an eligible crop, it wouldn't count towards the project's 10 reporting period limit. So if a project consisted of only corn soy fields in that 2-crop rotation, then you're possibly looking at a 20-year project. But you're right, only the corn year would be counted, only credits could be earned during that corn year. CA. Does anybody have any more additional questions they'd like to ask? We can and thank you, Sammy. I believe he's done a great job of fielding your questions that they've been coming in, so it's greatly appreciated. And All right, new question. Have there been any projects involving biochar? Not with this protocol, no, to answer shortly. But if you'd like to follow up, please follow up with that one with the reserve via email. That would possibly be a potential new methodology involving biochar, and be happy to discuss that with you further there. Is the new question, is the protocol now live, such accepting applications? Yes, yes, and thank you for asking. I sped through the timeline. Version 2.0 was adopted by our board in October, and so it is now in effect. And so, yeah, we are actively accepting project submittals or project listings to at this time. And so listing forms and the project listing forms can be accessed on our on the Climate Action Reserve's nitrogen management on the program and project documents webpage, where we contain all our submittal forms. And if you are at that stage and are ready to start a project and have any questions there, please follow up with me via email. Be happy to help guide you through that process. New question. So is there a threshold on nitrogen rate? So with the performance thresholds and the performance standard test, one of the reasons we looked at a nitrogen use efficiency metric and not on N rate itself is depending on early actors or late, I guess, bad actors that growers out there may have already made a substantial reduction in their N rate to the point where if we had set a threshold chiefly on an N rate amount, a performance threshold N rate amount, they might not be eligible because it's already because they're already and then late actors who have been excessively applying nitrogen could seemingly easily get under that threshold. And so just with the nitrogen use efficiency metric, just kind of adding more of a level playing field. And also it was important to take in crop yields into consideration with establishing performance thresholds, because we don't want N rate to be reduced to a point that crop yield is compromised. And while that we don't anticipate that possibly that happening, as I'm saying, growers and farmers understandably so are very risk averse to anything that might damage crop yield. We still have that as an extra check to make sure yield stays in check. And but what is important to note though on the I guess the of threshold of N rate, only emission reductions and so are earned for reductions in N rate. So in that sense, they're if that makes sense. So while the NUE the nitrogen use efficiency metric can be improved from improvements to yield alone, and maybe not with a nitrogen rate reduction per se, or not much of a nitrogen rate reduction per se, it's still, so if you improve your partial factor productivity above that county benchmark, it's still it's your N rate reduction though that will earn you carbon credits. Next question, I might have missed this, but in addition to the applied N rate resulting yield, irrigation status, tillage type, what else is needed to be logged for monitoring? Manure, lime, other. It's a great question, and I should note too that the reserve will also be publishing shortly a nitrogen management project protocol handbook that will help address questions like that. Where we will have what is required for monitoring and reporting, and what we will constitute as acceptable records to do so. And so to directly answer this question, yes, manure applications, organic applications would also need to be recorded. Lime would not. There's more details in the protocol, but just as a general catch-all, it's any data that is required for, or parameters are required for determining eligibility or in the quantification of emission reductions would need to be reported. And so as organic N is one such instance, then yes, then manure, if manure is applied, it would need to be. And as you had already pointed out, yes, the applied synthetic N rate, the yield, irrigation status, and tillage type are say great examples of the important parameters that need to be logged for monitoring. All right, great question. What happens if there's a drought and more N is applied than used by the crop? So this is a great question. So the protocol, again, it's on N rate reduction and not necessarily on nitrogen balance or N surplus. So if it ends up in this where we think, a drought might have more of an impact on projects going forward, would be on the resulting crop yield. And if there is an instance where due to drought, the project developers feel that the yield has been implicated because of the drought, and this can be verified, which should be pretty easy to do if there is a significant drought, then that year can be withdrawn, voluntarily withdrawn. And so, while that it wouldn't be necessarily great for the state of the environment if more N is lost to the environment than used by the crop due to a drought, how the protocol addresses the drought years is those years can be voluntarily withdrawn if we feel that the drought has compromised the project. And if the yield is compromised, it might not pass the performance standard test. Could be an example where that could happen.
Hi Trevor, it's Sammy here. Do you mind if I say a quick word?
Sure, do.
Great. Thanks, Trevor. Hi, folks. So Sammy Osmond here, working with Trevor on this work. We had a quick question earlier, which was how are we planning to spread the word to growers, which we didn't quite address yet. So first of all, thanks to all of you for joining us. This is one way that we are sort of getting the word out to stakeholders in the industry, to growers ideally as well. And Trevor's also working on a handbook, which we're going to distribute. And then we'll hopefully also be attending a number of conferences in the coming months and year to get the word out. And then each and every one of you, we've got a broad sort of base of people on this webinar. If you're interested in collaborating with us or interested in developing a project, please feel free to reach out anytime and we can have a chat and talk through how that might be complementary to some of the great work you're doing. And certainly if you could disseminate the information to your networks, that would also be greatly appreciated. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Sammy. Yeah, and I guess, folks, we got a couple minutes left. See, all right, let's say time for one last question then. So kind of just touched on a little bit before, but it's, again, getting at some of the confusion between the passing the performance standard test, that PFP versus then getting carbon credits. So the important thing to note here is that the performance threshold needs to be surpassed in order to be eligible, but then it is that N rate reduction that is used for quantifying emission reductions and and generating your carbon credits. So there are a number of practices that can be applied to improve nitrogen use efficiency and in that threshold to improve the yield and reduce the but then it would just be that reduction in fertilizer that would be used to calculate your carbon credits. All right, and I believe that is all the time we have, guys. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate the feedback and hope you found this to be informative. And as Sammy mentioned, we strongly encourage you to reach out to us with any further questions you may have that we didn't cover here, and with any possible opportunities for collaboration, and hope that you might, spread the word throughout your networks. Be greatly appreciated. So thank you all for your time today, and hope you all have a great rest of your day and week.